Thanks so much for coming out on a Friday night, a rainy Friday night. I'm Bill Cavanaugh. I'm the director of the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology here at DePaul, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Emmanuel Katongole. He's been a good friend of mine for many years, and a good friend of the Center's for many years as well. In fact, this is the book that he wrote the last time he was with us, The Sacrifice of Africa. It's a terrific book. It's not only one of the most interesting books on Africa, but it's one of the most interesting books of political theology that I tell everyone that they have to read. So you owe me for the royalties. So Emmanuel is with us for 4 months this spring, writing another book, and we're anxious to read it, and I'm sure it's going to be just as wonderful as his other one. Emmanuel Katongole is a priest of the Archdiocese of Kampala in Uganda, his native country, and he currently serves as Associate Professor of Theology and Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. He was director previously at Duke University of the Center for Reconciliation, and he's done a lot of important work on reconciliation based primarily in Africa, but applicable to many other contexts as well. And one of the current projects, you can read of his other books and so on the sheet that's in front of you, but I just wanted to mention one other of his current projects, which is a kind of experimental farm. He's gotten a piece of land in Uganda and is now developing an experimental farm in which these theological matters can take root in a very literal, material way, and working on a way to kind of bring people together to steward the land and to enact reconciliation both with each other and with the natural environment as well. So he's a man of many interests and many talents. Please join me in welcoming Emmanuel Katongole.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for the very warm introduction this evening. Thank you, beyond the introduction, for this time, for having invited me here to be here for 4 months of fellowship, and it's been an incredible time here. I really appreciate your generosity, your hospitality, and the space that you have made available to me these last 4 months to work on this book project called Lament. I'm extremely grateful to the Center for Catholicism and Intercultural Theology that you direct, always making these kind of spaces available to scholars like myself. As you know, this is my second time. Actually, I'm happy to know that the program is going well, because I was the very first fellow that the center hosted 5 years ago, and out of that time here, that's where this book, The Sacrifice of Africa, was written. So if I have done anything interesting in life, the Center for Catholicism has an imprint on that, you can be sure. So, but anyway, I thank you very much, Bill, for hosting me, for having me here for this time of fellowship and sabbatical, and for all your support that goes even beyond that. To all my colleagues at the Center for World Catholicism and the Department of Catholic Studies, with the company and support that I've enjoyed these last 4 months, I want to thank you very much. Stan, Michael, and all the other friends and colleagues at the Center for World Catholicism, wonderful staff, Francis, Karen, Anna, Brenda. It's just been an incredible time for me. I'm so extremely grateful for your hospitality, for your support, for the friendship that you have extended to me these last 4 months. And thank you all, my friends, for coming out to this evening, Friday evening. I'm really humbled that you all will come out this Friday evening to listen to a lecture, not just any lecture, but a lecture on Lament. What's going on here? It's Friday evening. Friday evening. So I know there are so many options that you had, but that you would come out here for this lecture, I think just shows how much I am enjoyed that. So since it's a Friday evening, I will try as much as I can to make it as painless as possible. But where the topic is difficult, it's one of lament. I must say I've had a challenge these last 2 weeks as I kept moving back and forth of what I should be doing this evening for this lecture. And the first thought was to take a chapter out of this book and go through that and read that chapter, kind of deliver the traditional lecture, read the lecture, so that through that lecture you would get a sense of what I am doing. So that was one idea that I had. Then I kept getting back that perhaps it might be better to provide just an overview of this project, of where it's coming from, where it is headed, so that people get a sense, a general sense, a broad sense of what the project is about and what it is trying to accomplish. In the end, I decided that I'm going to go that route. I'm just going to give you a broad overview of this book project that I've been working on, Born of Lament, on the gift and discipline of hope in Africa. To kind of give you a sense of the what that I'm trying to do, a sense of the how I'm trying to do it, and a sense of the why it is so important for me to do this. First of all, the why. Why am I writing a book on hope in Africa? And why do I give it this title, Born of Lament? In 2009, when I was finishing working on the sacrifice of Africa, which is political theology, I made the argument about the need to reinvent politics in Africa. And toward the end of the book, I used the 3 stories to make that argument, but also to display that something like a reinvention of politics in Africa is going on, grounded within Christian faith. These are 3 stories of activists: a bishop from Sudan, Taban, a mother from northern Uganda, Angelina Chan, whose daughter was abducted, and a woman from Burundi, Maggie Arankisi. These are powerful stories. But as I was finishing working on them, I realized that what all these stories had in common, that these activists were able to transform some of the most difficult conditions, personal conditions, social conditions. They were able to transform them into opportunities for creativity, for innovativeness, for entrepreneurship, for hope. I noticed that towards the end of the book, and it struck me, and I referred to that kind of transformation of these difficult circumstances into a new future. I referred to that using the notion of lament. I mentioned lament, the theological category of lament. But I didn't have the time. I didn't even have the theoretical framework to kind of tease that out. But it kept haunting me. I said, I'd like to hear more, to know more. What is lament? How does it work? What are the political, practical implications of this notion of lament? So that was one. That's one that kind of remained at the back of my mind as I finished the sacrifice of Africa. And then a year later, in 2010, I read this book, Dancing in the Glory of Monsters. It is by Jason Stearns, a political scientist that writes on the Congo. Dancing in the Glory of Monsters is such a moving and powerful book. Kind of captures the story of Congo from 1996, the first Congo War, to more recently, like 2010. at all the wars that have been going on in the Congo. It kind of provides an internal perspective to these wars. And anecdotes about the generals, Ugandan generals, Rwandan generals, but also about the people that were caught up in the war and the violence. Very powerful, very, very moving. Towards the end of the book, however, Jason Stearns makes this conclusion on page 328. Perhaps the most persistent problem I have witnessed while researching and writing the book on Congo has been the lack of visionary, civic-minded leadership. So he kind of ends the book in a kind of despair. I've witnessed while researching the book the lack of visionary, civic-minded leadership in the whole of Congo. And then I said, really? What about people like Kato, Kasali, Damati, this woman that I know who is a parliamentarian in Bukavu, resigned the parliamentary seat to work with women that are abused? How about people like Dr. Michael Opio, who led the renovation of the hospital in Nyakunde? How about people like Bishop Jomo in Shumbe Diocese, who is building roads? I said, really? There are no civic-minded leaders in Africa, in Congo? Really? Where is he looking? I said, we need to be able to direct into a different lens as well, so that we can ask this kind of story. Because I knew all these leaders. We've been working with them through the work at the Center for Reconciliation. We've been meeting with them. And there's some of the most impressive leaders that I knew from Congo. Then after that, I tried to find a good book on hope on Africa. And I did read quite a number of books. Tried to find a good book on hope. And honestly, I could not. There were many books that mentioned the hope. The non-theological books, most of the books that talked about Africa kept kind of moving back and forth between pessimism, there is really no hope in Africa, or optimism. There's a number of books, for example, Dio Olapade's The Bright Continent that just came out. From the theological point of view, religious point of view, most of the books that talked about hope in Africa were just kind of prescribing, or there ought to be hope. We should remain hopeful. They're kind of projecting, prescribing. I haven't found a good book that displays hope. So I kept thinking, perhaps I need to write a book that does that, which not only prescribes, but displays hope. And then I read a text from 1 Peter. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that powerful. Yeah, I think that's what I would like to do. Give reason. Give an account of hope in Africa. So that's the what. That's what I'm trying to do in this book. Give an account to narrate hope in Africa. But Peter is writing to Christians actually who are in very similar situation like Christians in Africa. They are dispersed at the end of the empire, they are persecuted, they are losing hope, and so he encourages them to always be willing to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope. And he's talking about reasons, so I kind of felt that as an invitation to get inside, if you like, inside the stories, to kind of discover what I call the inner logic of that hope. What makes these people hopeful? And how do these situations of war, of violence, of poverty, how do they transform from inside into stories of hope? So that's the title, Born of Lament, trying to kind of give an account of hope. And then the how. How am I trying to do this? Because Peter, in giving this recommendation, or inviting people to give an account of hope, also adds, very interesting, he adds, it's not captured here, he adds, but do so with gentleness and reverence. Do so with gentleness and reverence. reverence. I kind of took that to say, well, that means that, yes, narratives are needed of hope, displaying of hope is needed, but not any narrative would do. It has to be a kind of unique type of narrative. Reverence, gentleness. In my own way, the way I read this is that it has to be a narrative that is able to capture both the simplicity but also the elegance of hope in Africa. Both the ordinary and the extraordinary nature of hope in Africa. Both the goodness and the beauty, the ethics and the aesthetics, if you like, of hope. And I thought one scholar, Lawrence Lightfoot, uses the method called portraiture. It kind of displays through kind of portraits that bring together ethnography, research, storytelling. And so that's the kind of method that I'm trying to do for this book. And Lightfoot talks about in doing research, and especially with the stories, the researcher not only listens to the story, but she is also listening for a story. So what is going on, even that is not said. So that's what I'm trying to do in this book. And what I'm going to do right now is kind of give you an overview of how this progresses or how this is structured. 5 sections, 12 chapters. Each section, will this get bigger? Each section, what I'm trying to do is kind of structure each section in a way that moves between theological portraiture and the portraits from the African context. So I begin each section with a chapter that reflects on a biblical passage that kind of provides a theological framework. And within that chapter, that's where I do most of the theological heavy lifting. And then the second chapter of each section, I kind of give the portrait of hope in Africa. So 2 chapters for each section, except part 5 that has 4 chapters. So part 1, let's talk about the hopeless continent. So the first chapter really is kind of gets into that text of 1 Peter 3:15. Be always prepared to give an account of hope, and I kind of display what is going on in that text within Peter, in order to highlight especially that for Peter, the hope that he is inviting the Christians to give is really caught at the intersection of great suffering, but also he talks about the new birth or newness that they already experience. So that's what I do in the first chapter. Then in the second chapter, Living on Top of Our Dead, I explore and analyze Dancing in the Body of Monsters, because it's such a powerful book and such a moving book. It captures not only the main argument of the book that in a way confirms that the political landscape in Africa needs not just a change of leaders, because there was a change from Mobutu to Kabila 1, Kabila 2, but a whole reinvention we can do in the sacrifice of Africa. But also capture some of the laments of the people that are caught up through the massacres. 5.4 million people have died since 1996 in Congo alone. 5.4 million people in the world. Over 200,000 women have been raped in Congo. And incredible, the massacres and the people that are caught in that. So in one of the vignettes of the people, this man who lost 2 sons in the war says, "We are living on top of our dead, if in no place to bury our dead." So I kind of analyze it, just kind of get a sense of the displacement, of the massacres, of the suffering, and use Congo as a lens, in a way, to tell the story of Africa. And most of the war, of course, is fought by a number of these young militias, kids. So some of the stories that are captured in Stan's book actually are stories of these kids who thought I thought they were giving a future because they invited them to join the rebels. They were given $100 each, and they could imagine what they could do with $100 and a future because they were just loitering around in Bukavu and Goma with nothing to do. So they said, I thought they were giving us a future. And of course, the future turns into a nightmare. Then in part 2, the cry of lament. I begin in chapter 3 with an exploration of the book of lamentation. There is no one to comfort her. This book of lamentation, I don't know whether many of you know the book of lamentation. A small book, 5 chapters, that is written, poems, actually, of lament, that are written after the destruction of Jerusalem. And 5 voices kind of speak, laments, including the voice of daughter Zion, mourning, crying for the destruction, asking God to see, to look, to have pity, but there is nobody who looks, not even God. Actually, God, there are 5 voices that speak. God is the only voice that remains silent in the whole of that book of Lamentation. So I spent a bit of time exploring the book of Lamentation and asking, is there any hope in something like the book of Lamentation? Because in many ways, it did reflect what was going on in many parts of Congo and in other parts of Africa. But I use also that chapter to kind of begin to narrow down on a definition of hope as I narrate hope lament as a way of seeing, as a way of standing, a way of naming, and a way of hoping in the midst of winds. Lament is the expression of pain, of crying, but it is a way of hoping when there are no more words left, and the way of engaging God in the midst of wrongdoings. I follow that with the chapter 4 on Gango Tengling, that I call Gango Tengling. That's actually our home is already dead. Actually, it's a song, a popular song in Igulu. So this chapter analyzes and explores and discusses a number of poems, songs, prayers, and art. When I was working on the book of Lamentation, I was eager to see, is there something like this going on in the East Africa region? And so I did research in northern Uganda, in Congo, and collecting poems, songs, art about to lament. And one of them is this Gango Tengling by Jeff Koron, who sings lament. And a lot of interesting poems, very, 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 very sad. Of course, what I discovered about these songs and poems and the artistic expressions, that they capture 3 things about lament. One, they give voice to grief. So it's crying out, they give voice. And like Gango Tengling says, woo, 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 kind of like people were crying. But it's a very popular, actually, kind of disco kind of song, but it's a song of lament. But they give voice to grief. And 2, they name the unspeakable. Things that are too deep for words. What has happened in some of the poems, for example, by Abim, Lamentations of Lamalo, he names what is going on in northern Uganda, using metaphors and images about the teacher's head being boiled in a pot and the children gathering to drink from the pot. It's such a deep, powerful, but it's kind of trying an attempt to name through metaphors what is too deep for words, what cannot be named. And 3, and the songs and the poems and so forth are also a kind of searching, groping, if you like, for restoration, for a new future, for hope, for a return home. And these aspects are, in a way, in most of the poems and songs, as well as the artistic pieces. But nothing as powerful as this artistic piece, this sculpture that actually I call theater in Congo. This is in Goma. This is at a school And so this artist, Eugene, sculpted this woman kind of to represent, again, with these songs and the poems, there are a number of metaphorical levels. First of all, the woman, as you can see, represents all the women, over the 200,000 women that have been raped in Congo. But on another level, the woman represents all the people that have been massacred and killed, the innocent ones that have been destroyed throughout the war. And yet, on a third level, third metaphorical level, the woman represents Congo herself. It is Congo that is raped. In fact, the base, that base is a map of the Congo, on which the sculpture of the woman so it's a map of the Congo. The boots, of course, represent the most of the terror has been committed by the military, by the militia. So that kind of represents an expression of the agents of the terror, of the rape, of the violence. But the interpretation he gives, that Eugene gives to this, that the boots are without feet in order to express the anonymity of the violence, of the rape, but also the pervasiveness of the rape and the violence is everywhere, anonymous and everywhere. There is a boot on top of the woman's breast, as you can see, which, according to Eugene, is to represent the lack of any future, especially in cultures where reproduction and the propagation of the next generation is such a crucial thing. It's the woman's reproductive capacity that has been shut up. So the boot on the woman's breast. But what I find even more powerful in this sculpted lament is the lamb. The lamb that he presses. So the woman is kind of helpless, leaning against the lamb, kind of giving a commentary that there's no one to help her, there's no one to console her, there's no one to comfort her, except the lamb. So it's kind of a theological commentary, actually, that he's providing through this sculpture, the lamb. The irony of it, of course, but with the deep theological meaning, is that the lamb on which the woman is leaning for help, for support, is herself a slain lamb, a kind of slaughtered lamb. So you can see the deep theological comment actually that is going on in a sculpture like that. So anyway, that's a chapter that where I spent looking at songs and poems and the artistic productions from the region. Then in part 3, the God of Lament. Chapter 5, why have you rejected me? Why must I go about mourning? I spent the time with this chapter to explore and examine the Psalms of Lament in the Old Testament. The book of Psalms, 150 Psalms altogether. That 60 of these Psalms of Lament shows how overwhelming the notion of lament is in the Old Testament. That 60% of the Psalms will be Psalms of Lament. Even more striking when you realize that in Hebrew, the book of Psalms, what we call the book of Psalms, is called the book of praises. So it is the worship song, the worship hymnal, if you like, of the Old Testament congregation. A third of that is also songs of lament. So what is going on within these Psalms of Lament? What I discover in exploring, examining the Psalms of Lament, that there is a turning in and toward God and around God. It's kind of like almost a circling. Why have you rejected me? Why must I go about mourning? Why do you keep quiet? Why do you hide your face? They kind of keep turning in toward and around God. So it gives a sense of lament as a turning, the mourning as a turning in and around God. But also what becomes clear from many of these psalms of lament, even as they end in praise, in confidence of God's intervention, most of them, God is just silent, just like in Lamentations. So, what does this point to, this silence of God? Even when God's beloved people are crying, why do you hide your face? Where are you when I need you? That God will remain silent. So I kind of tease and follow that line of argumentation to see what kind of theological sense underlies that silence of God. And realizing that the God that many of these sons of lament are turning to and so forth is perhaps also a powerless God. Perhaps he's a God also who is a suffering God. He's not just a God who is just waiting for the cries of God's people. As a God who cries with God's people. But what kind of power is there in the suffering God? What kind of hope can there be in the powerless and the suffering or the crucified God? So I trust this a bit historically to see what kind of power, what kind of salvation there is. And realize, for example, among the Negro spirituals, the section where I deal with the Negro spirituals, the songs that came out of slave culture in America. They love this picture of a powerless God. And so the theme of crucifixion comes back over and over again. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? That's to whom they are leaning against, the crucified God. And actually, the suffering God, the crucified God, becomes, in a way, the source of energy, of resistance, of struggle. Very surprising, if you like. And so, through some theologians, Jürgen Moltmann, and also even liberation theology, the theme of the crucified people in liberation theology, Terence, Segundo, and all others, kind of that notion of a crucified people. And what that generates, actually, that theme of the crucified, the suffering God, what that generates is energy for struggle on behalf of the crucified peoples of the world. So, is there something like this? Is there anything like this going on within the African context? So that's what I try to do in chapter 6. The only response to the excess of evil is the excess of love. Where I tell two stories. First of all, the story of Archbishop Emmanuel Katongole of Bukavu. Became Archbishop in 1997 in Bukavu, following the assassination of Archbishop Moshiwa, the story which has been on. During this time, the RCD, the United for Congolese Democracy, is controlling that western that area of Bukavu and Goma exercise, imposing heavy taxes. So the people in Bukavu really are suffering. So Katongole climbs his pulpit in 1999 on Christmas and really calls out on Rwanda, on the RCD, for the suffering in Congo, for the heavy taxation, for the pillage that is going on, for the looting. So he really preaches a very, very powerful message that resonated with a lot of people in the community. Such that immediately after Christmas, the civic leaders organized a strike, closed down the markets to protest the heavy taxation. And the RCD, of course, is concerned that it's Katongole now meddling with politics. So they get hold of him and send him back to Butembo, where to come into exile. So they don't allow him to be in Bukavu. But the strike just continued on, and it was galvanizing actually the entire population, Christian, Muslim, traditional, everyone, traders. So it was galvanizing everyone. So they sent him to Butembo in exile, from where he continued to write letters to his congregation back in Bukavu. And the strike just continued. First of all, they thought it was going to strike for a week, but once they exiled Katongole, they just continued on with the strike. And so Katongole is in Butembo writing letters, especially using the opportunities of feast days and liturgical seasons like Lent, writing letters back to to his people. Like, for example, in March 15th, his Lenten letter of 2000. In these difficult times, let us not doubt that the love of God is for us. If God is on our side, who will be against us? But no, the logic of the gospel is the logic not of power, but of the cross. God has chosen the weak of the world to undermine the strong. The only response to the excess of evil is the excess of love. Powerful statement. The only response to the excess of evil is the excess of love. And then Canonical encouraging the people to take part in the liturgical celebrations. That is how they get drawn into that story of the excess of love, which in the end actually is a non-violent struggle. Because then he kind of gives them options, alternatives in the face of war, what they can do. Traders do not overcharge and so forth. So it's quite a whole vision of living non-violent living within the context of war. So something like this is going on, again, depending on this excess of love, which for Catholic is manifested by God's suffering death on the cross. Instead of taking up violence, he suffers violence. And then I also tell the story of Sister Rosemary Nyirumbe, a sister from northern Uganda, who is a good friend of DePaul. I understand she's going to be the commencement speaker here. I think she's already going to be given a doctorate here. But she is in northern Uganda. She's a celebrity now. After last year, Time magazine named her as one of 100 most important people in the world. Yeah, so what she's holding is a bag that they have made out of these pork chops that are becoming so popular. And that is a metaphor for her, for what she's doing with the lives of the girls in Uganda that have been battered by the Lord's Resistance Army war, abused, that everyone has rejected, like the pork chops and so forth. Transforming them into beautiful handbags, into beautiful persons. So these are very, very popular handbags that she's. So, and she was recently, of course, there is a book, Sowing Hope, where she's recently featured in a documentary with the same title, Sowing Hope, that kind of really show what an incredible work she's doing in northern Uganda, taking these girls from the war, many of them coming with children, some of them when you go visit St. Monica's, some of them have had their limbs cut off, some of them their lips. It's just unimaginable, the depth of evil, the excess of evil that has happened. And she's taking these girls, rehabilitating them, giving them a future. And so a documentary with the same title, Sowing Hope. And of course, within that documentary, within Time magazine as well, she is hailed as a great humanitarian hero. What is missed? Of course, there is no doubt she's a great humanitarian. What is missed is the inner logic why she's doing what she is doing. It's not humanitarian that is driving her. It is because she is a sister of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And through interviews, then I begin to discover what drives her. As she tells her story of how she joined the convent, what drew her to that particular convent. It is the love, the compassion that she discovered in the Sacred Heart. The bleeding heart, but a heart that is so full of compassion. And so she says, that's what I'm trying to do actually. And so towards the end of some of the marks she says, for example, there is no other formula of love. This formula is not attractive because it is the cross. But there is no other classroom to learn about compassion, love, and mercy than the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That is the highest PhD. That is what I'm trying to imitate. Now, if you don't capture a sense of that, there is something about her that you miss. Of course, she's a great humanitarian hero, no doubt about that. But unless you capture that inner logic, as I call it. You miss to account for the full agency of her life and what drives her. Apart from the piece of lament, and I need to move quickly here. But if you only knew the things that make for peace, I begin with an exploration of this passage from Luke, which is the story of Jesus crying over Jerusalem. The Gospels give two instances where Jesus literally cries. One, death of Lazarus, and this over Jerusalem. Significant here, Jesus is actually not just crying. The term that is used is wailing. He's wailing over Jerusalem and saying, if only you knew the things that make for peace. The scene is quite interesting. So there is this huge crowd accompanying Jesus into Jerusalem, finally. And they're all shouting, Hosanna, son of David, and they're waving palm branches and so forth. And Jesus is breaking down, not just crying, but wailing and suffocating with emotion and saying, if you only knew the things that make for peace. What's going on here? The more that I explored this text, the more I realized that actually what Jesus is doing in this text is to reenact the whole Old Testament prophetic tradition, especially Jeremiah, the wailing prophet. And so, but when you read Jeremiah, the wailing prophet, you realize what Jeremiah is trying to do through his tears is one, to point to what is wrong. It's a social critique, actually. Political, social critique of his society. Secondly, to draw attention to the covenant that people have forgotten. That's why there is injustice. That's why the kings don't care about the poor. Thirdly, Jeremiah mimics, if you like, God's own cries and tears. So in the text of Jeremiah, at times we are not sure whether it is Jeremiah that is crying or God that is crying. So they kind of cry back and forth, both God and Jeremiah. And finally, Jeremiah pointing to the new covenant, a kind of as a new social vision. There's things like this going on within the East Africa region, within Africa. So that's why I tell the story of Archbishop Christopher Monzihirwa, the predecessor of Katariko of Bukavu. An incredible leader that actually was assassinated. Called himself the Muhudumu of Bukavu, simple lifestyle, former Jesuit, but very, very strong in his leadership. And he saw the whole of the town, kind of battered town, as his charge. He was a Muhudumu. So, as the Rwandan forces prepared to attack, he mobilized the civic leaders, called them together to try to save the city. And as he came down from that meeting, came to the roadblock, introduced himself as the Archbishop of Monzihirwa. This young soldier radioed to some commander somewhere that I have the Archbishop of Monzihirwa here, and was given a message. He told the Archbishop, come, stand there, say your prayers, and he shot him in the head. Assassinated. At the funeral of Monzihirwa, people remember that one of his favorite sayings was this: there are things which can be seen only by eyes that have cried. A very powerful statement. So I try to go behind that and see what it means. What for Monzihirwa that means actually is a kind of an invitation into the way of what he calls the way of Christ, which is again the way of the cross. And the final chapter at 5, the gift of lament. I begin with the chapter on the voice that is heard in Rama, Matthew chapter 2. This is a very well-known passage, the beginning of Matthew's Gospel. After the slaughter of the innocent, Herod realizes that the Magi are not coming back, and so he orders the slaughter of all the innocent in Bethlehem. And then Matthew says, in this way we are fulfilled the words of the prophet Jeremiah. The voice is heard in Ramah. It is the voice of Rachel, weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. And quite very powerful. But when you look at it in the context of Matthew's Gospel, which is very political, Matthew's Gospel is very political, one of the most political Gospels. Luke 2 is very political, but Matthew is very political. When we start, he declares that he wants to proclaim the coming of the kingdom, the Basileia of heaven, the kingdom of heaven. He wants to, which kind of is about the social, political, economic conditions here on earth as they are in heaven. So it's very political. Matthew's Gospel is very political. So that's what he is proclaiming at the beginning. And then this text is given within the immediate context where Matthew says, this is how Jesus came to be born. It tells the story of Mary, and then in chapter 2 he says, after Jesus was born, then he tells the story of the flight, the visit of the Magi, the flight into Egypt, and then the slaughter of the innocent. So this whole text has a rich, in a way, context at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, a very political. But the question is, why does Matthew say in this way we are fulfilled the words of the prophet Jeremiah, the voices? What is fulfilled? What is he getting to? And so I will spend a bit of time actually on the prophecy that Matthew is referring to, the prophecy of Jeremiah. So 31, 15, 22. This is where it is taken. As the Lord, says the Lord, voices heard in Ramah, lamentations and bitter weeping. Do we have time? Let's read this poem together because it's quite such a powerful and beautiful passage. Is this big enough for? I guess that's the biggest it can go. Are you able to read it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's read it together. Thus says the Lord.
Lamentation, bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children, because they are unborn.
Thus says the Lord.
Keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears.
For there is a word for your word,
declares the Lord, and they shall come back from the land of the enemy. It is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children shall come back to their own country.
I have heard Ephraim grieving.
You have disciplined me, I was disciplined, like an untrained calf. Bring me back that I may be restored, for you are the Lord my God. For after I turned your way, I repented, and after I was instructed, I struck my thigh. I was ashamed, I was confounded, because I was disgraced among you.
Is Ephraim my Messiah?
Is he my darling child?
For as often as I speak against him,
I do remember him still. Therefore my heart yearns for him. I surely have mercy on him, declares the Lord.
set up road markers for yourself.
Make yourself guideposts. Consider well the highway, the road by which you went. Return, O virgin Israel. Return these to your cities. How long will you waver, O faithless Lord? The Lord has created a new thing in the earth. The woman in circles.
There is a lot that is going on in this one. A lot of I think first of all we're going to read the beginning and the end. The beginning 15 that begins with the woman crying, bitter weeping. It begins with bitter weeping. And the end 22, along with you, for the Lord has created a new thing in the land. The verb that is used there is bara, the same word that is used as in Genesis chapter 1, the story of creation. The Lord has created a new thing. Beginning, bitter weeping, and a new thing in the land. Verse 15, bitter weeping. The term that is used is tamorim. It's the same word that is used actually for guideposts. The bitter weeping at the beginning turns into the guideposts at the end. But look also the sequence and the number of voices that are involved. First of all, it is Rachel weeping. Then Yahweh consoles Rachel. Then Ephraim, Rachel's grandchild, is crying in exile, repentance. Then Yahweh reconsiders, is Ephraim not my dear child? Then the prophet Jeremiah encourages the people, get ready, set up road markers for yourself, be ready to return. And then he announces the new thing in the land. But the children also change. Up here is talking about Ephraim, my dear son. Yeah, the gender has changed. It's a virgin daughter, it is all faithless daughter. Again, there's a number of other excuse me, a number of other reversals that are going on in this poem. They return to the land that is promised. Eventually, the children return to the land, to their land, but now the Lord does a new thing in that very land of the exile. So many incredible reversals that come to the same thing of the promise of a new thing that the Lord has created. And that began, and that's the key, that began with the tears. And Rachel's tears kind of trigger these movements and these reversals, eventually ending with the Lord doing a new thing on the land. So I use that as a kind of the theological background, biblical background, and I begin to tell some of the stories. The first story that I tell is the story of David Kasai from Beni. Quickly, that is the story of this incredible man who was the rector of a huge, big university in Nairobi. Next, at the height of his success at NEGS, as president of NEGS, the war is going on in Congo. He resigns his position to go back to Beni. He's from Congo, to go back to Beni in the middle of the war. People say, are you crazy? What are you doing? And first of all, he says because of the lament that was coming to him. His sister had died during the war. His niece had also died, being killed during the war, and the militia she was pregnant, and they had cut her open and cut the child's head off. It was just his brother had died in the war. So out of this lament, he says, I need to go back home. At the height of his success as president of the university, got back to Beni in the middle of the war. Why? And so, prepares to go back, and actually out of that founds a university to train new leaders for Congo. A very impressive outfit, even if it's small, but the ambition that drives it is just incredible. Training a whole new generation of leaders. And some of the impact is already had have just been enormous. One of the students, I think, captures it very well when he says, I transferred from another university, considered to be one of the best. I could fill my head with theories, I had very good teachers, but coming here to UCBC, we have learned a whole new way of seeing the world. A whole new way of seeing the world. We have come to believe that even simple people can affect change. We are the change. It's one of the students at UCBC. When I was at UCBC, it happened to be, and this is the university now is 7 years, that started in the middle of the war, as I said. It happened to be the championship games for the regional championship basketball. UCBC was playing against the University of Goma, which is quite powerful. And so the whole town of Beni actually gathered to witness their students play against this big team. And they did win, and they did win. But for me, that the whole town would actually come to gather around this basketball court. It's like UCBC is actually gathering the city, the town, in the midst of the war. Last year, 2014, the number of massacres started around Beni, and the number of people fled to Uganda. The civic leader said what to UCBC, the university, please don't close. keep on with the lectures. If you close, that will signal the whole death of the city. And so they kept on. Incredible. But what is going on? Why does somebody like Kasali leave his position at a university next to return back to war? What is driving him? So as he describes what he's doing, he realizes he tells the story of what he calls his love affair with God. And all he's doing is actually almost just listening to that story of God. God, what do you want me to do? I don't want to be in your way. And so he really felt called to go back. So this is a kind of a story that is, again, kind of confounds that kind of gift in the midst of a war, almost similar to the story of Rachel weeping and crying for her children. Then I tell the story of Nagi Barankise of Burundi that I told in the Sacrifice of Africa, because I realized that I didn't actually capture the sense of what drives this woman, Nagi Barankise. Sorry. That has raised over 30,000 children in Ruhigi, Burundi, a very remote area. But the story begins with her surviving genocide in 1993 and her witnessing the massacre of 72 people in front of her, including a close friend who brought her children, 2 girls, to her and told Maggie to look after my children. And out of that kind of a determination to build a new generation of children in the love of God. And that is what driving actually Maison Shalom. Raised over 30,000, she set up businesses for them, cinema, even a swimming pool in Ruhigi, Burundi. Those who might not really, I start to be corrected, but I think there are only 2 swimming pools in Burundi. One at this posh Belgian-run hotel, Hotel Club du Lac in Bujumbura, and the other one, you guessed right, in Ruhigi, for the children. What people might call orphans. Of course, for her, they are not orphans. Nobody is an orphan in the household of God. So the kind of what's driving her? But when you listen to her story inside, then you realize that the story does not only begin in a Lament, 1993. It is deepened through Lament, because 1996, she breaks down. She was working so hard, determined to fight anybody who was in her way or who had anything against the children. And then she broke. And then she spent a whole month in a monastery. And that's where in the month in a monastery that she discovered, as if for the first time, these are her words, God, Jesus hanging on the cross. And out of that, the story of forgiveness. And so, when she comes out of that, she is not only driven by this incredible forgiveness, she makes it as an essential dimension of the children's life in Maison Shalom. Forgiveness becomes the key to understanding Maison Shalom. But how demeanor also changes. She begins to dress very elegantly. First of all, this was incredibly beautiful, loud and shining colors and so on. But she's a very beautiful woman, as you can see, an incredible smile. But before that, if you saw her after 1993, she was very, very angry. And she's kind of a whole new, as she says, but that's when she starts to dreaming. That's when her imagination, if you like, was released. That's when she dreams of the theater, the swimming pool, brand new hospital, and now a university. Kind of really giving, according to her, a model of what Burundian society ought to look like. Driving this vision out of Lament. And finally, what drives her, when you realize this, is Lament again. One time I asked her actually, because whenever you go back, whenever you go to Ruhigi, people when they go to Ruhigi, they want to see the hospital. It's a huge hospital. I was with one staff of World Vision who has traveled in many places in Africa. He said, I don't think I've met a cleaner hospital than this one. And he has traveled quite a bit in Africa. Now, a university. So people are just want to see these projects and so forth. And they say, so how did you do this? And he said, no, come. So then he goes back to the bishop's house where they were in 1993 when the massacre happened. And they begin the story. And then he takes the people to the gravesite where she buried the 72 people. And of course, by the time she's crying and everybody's crying. So I try to say, why do you do that? Why don't you just tell the story? Why do you keep going back to that gravesite? Why is that so significant? And her answer was, I have to go back to the gravesite so that I can remember the future well. So that I can remember what Meso Shalom is about. So she continually visits that. And also she continually visits that every day. An hour of prayer, meditation, in front of the Blessed Sacrament, in front of the cross. Again, driven by him. And the final story that I capture is the story of the martyrs of Lament, or the Lament of the martyrs. The number of people, the innocents, like Rachel's children who are no more in Africa. Lots of innocents that have shed their lives. What is the hope that lies in there? What is the gift of martyrs? And as I describe the number of stories of martyrs and what they stood for, I see three gifts. The martyrs kind of threaten us, if you like, with vigilance. They kind of remind us, you can't sleep, you have to keep awake, you have to be attentive to the gorillas, the native gorillas that in a way are killed. Two, the martyrs kind of invite us into a life of social struggle. And I mentioned these, but I kind of covered them with a kind of number of stories that kind of display that social struggle for justice and on behalf of the poor. And three, invite us into a resurrected community. Like this story I end with of Buta, the martyrs of Buta, the young seminarians of Buta, 4 of them that were killed in 1997. Of course, this Burundi, like the story before that of Maggie, is under war, ethnic attacks, and counter-revenge, Hutu, Tutsi. And this one school in Buta, the rector tried to bring the communities together, the boys together, Hutu and Tutsi, and guide them to stay together. And through a number of practices and exercises and community work, and they kept together. And then in the middle of 1997, they were attacked. Because I think what we are standing for, as the only community that remained united between the Hutu and Tutsi, was challenging to many people. So they were attacked by a militia group that was led by a fierce woman. And this woman tells the boys to separate between the Hutu and Tutsi. And they refused. They stuck together and said, no, we are all friends. So she ordered the militia to start shooting, and they started shooting indiscriminately. And 40 students were killed. One of the students that had been wounded, he didn't realize that he had been wounded, ran to wake up the rector who had actually locked his office when he had gunshots. So he banged on the rector's door to ask him to open the door. Father, it's me, open the door. So the rector came out of his hiding under the bed and opened the door. The kid ran inside the house and told Zachary, Father, they tried to separate us. We refused. We have won. And the boy collapsed and died. We refused. We have won. So, what kind of winning is this? What kind of strange hope this is? What kind of strange gift that is? So it's kind of stories like this, that kind of we have learned in a way that I'm trying to capture through this book and project of the God of Lament. And I think with that we can end there, and then we can have some conversation. So thank you very much.
Hello, that was a good talk, thank you. Why are children and not grown adults fighting the wars in Africa?
Actually, it is adults that are fighting the wars. The children are recruited into the adult wars. It's a struggle for power, like for example, the story of Congo, it's a struggle for power. As Uganda and Rwanda, for example, join forces to invade Congo, and Kabila, so Kabila in power. It's the war of the generals fighting for power. But the children are an easy target of recruit into the fighting forces. In two ways. One, like the story of some of the young people in Dancing the World of Monsters, Kizito and others, that are kind of promised a future, that we are fighting to liberate our country. We are fighting for democracy. We are fighting for development. And as an incentive for that, they were given $100 to join. Wow, they had never seen so much money in their lives. And they started imagining what they could do with that $100. One of the kids said, I'm going to marry a wife. Immediately, you started thinking about the dowry. Then said, I'm going to build a house, $100. So, the kids are an easy target. But, like in northern Uganda, it's also the forceful abduction of the kids into the war. And then they are forced to commit all sorts of atrocities so that they are caught between the bush and the home. They can't go back home. Some of the songs from northern Uganda, even Oteke Link's song, there is another one, Kwena Nono, things about the children that are caught between the bush, they can't go back home. You reject me for nothing. What if you are you? So you can feel the anguish, the agony of the children that have been abducted, and now, once they escape, they come home and they cannot be received back home. They are rejected, so they kind of are in that in between. So the children are just really proxy, if you like. It's the adults' war. It's the war of the adults, the generals, struggle for power. The children just, That is why the reality of these child soldiers in Africa has made it complicated. The question, the distinction between victim and perpetrator. In peace studies, we use that distinction between a victim and a perpetrator. Now, these child soldiers are victims stroke perpetrators at once. Because they're victims because many of them are abducted when they are young, then they commit atrocities. So they live in that kind of ambiguous world. And that is reflected in some of the painful songs from the northern Uganda.
Great, that was a terrific talk. You say born of lament, and you talk of these stories. They're essentially seeds. I mean, in the face of what you described, they're seeds, they're a start. Do you see any of those seeds in particular as really having that ability to blossom into something a little bigger that go to that next level?
Yeah, I don't know what the next level is, but there is already so many next levels embedded within these stories themselves. Look at, for example, Mezo Shalom, Magi Barankise from Burundi. Starting in 1993, with 7 kids that she had adopted, she bribed soldiers and got 25 other kids, as the 2, Lizette and Lydia, that were given to her. She has looked after 35,000 kids. I think that's already the next level. You go and stand in Ruhigi. It's just amazing what she's done in the Ruhigi, transformation of that whole community, which is both an incredible gift, but which is also a challenge. in 2008 actually, after the hospital was built, a number of people were threatened. The directors of the government hospital, which is just a joke. So it's kind of, in a way, the building of a hospital, a beautiful hospital, put to shame a number of people. The government hospital is just a miserable unit. The government hospital itself, a clinic. So in comparison to what Maggie has done, it becomes a kind of toll. Yeah. So as a result of that, a number of leaders tried to assassinate her. They set up a plot to assassinate her, which actually went astray because they killed instead a French woman who was traveling in a car like Maggie's. And as if that was not enough, now they realized the mistake, so they drummed up charges against her and they took her to prison, that she's the one who killed the French woman. And a number of people in the communities came and gave false witness, saying, yeah, we saw her do this and so forth, because they had been bribed and so forth. So, is that next level? I think that's the next level. She almost left, but she decided to stay. The children, the story of the children, if you listen to some of the stories of the children, there is, for example, the story of Bosco. Bosco was 7 years old when his family was attacked. And they killed his parents. And just seeing this 7-year-old kid, seeing the parents killed in front of him, set him blind. Bosco became blind. The story actually is on YouTube. Bosco's guitar is called. The kid went blind. So Maggie tried to take her to Germany to see if we could get his sight back. The doctor said, I don't think so. Unless when he feels a little bit confident and at his peace, he might recover. So Maggie bought him a guitar because he loves music, and Bosco now is one of the leading musicians in Burundi. He's regained sight in one eye. It's surprising, you can see in one eye. Last July, he got married. His music is so popular, but his music is also a challenge. Whenever the president, because of course now there are so many problems in Burundi, but whenever the president was going to an event, he would invite Bosco and his team to sing. Until Bosco began to sing songs that were critical of government and politicians. And his songs began to be banned in Burundi. Is that next level enough? So this is already the next level. Maggie, every weekend, Maison Shalom has a university station that educates people on human rights, educates people on what is going on in politics. I was with her at a workshop in January. She had to leave immediately because she needed to go back to Burundi, again to try to force the president, Nkurunziza, not to go for a third term. Of course, Nkurunziza didn't listen. So there is already a next level that is embedded, and let's see the story of Kasari, UCBC, this university in Congo. When the Congo government wanted to experiment with the new education system, which they started in 2008, a whole new education system for Congo, who they turn to? They asked 2 universities to start this program. One is the old Jesuit University in Kinshasa, Ruvanu, very old university. 27,000 students at this University of Ruvanu. So of course, that would be a good university to inaugurate this program, CWCIT. And the other university that they wanted them to start this new program, you guessed right, UCBC. This startup has only 458 students in the middle of nowhere in Beni. Is that next level enough? So there is a next level enough, unless, by next level I mean, when is the child of Maison Shalom going to be president? but there is the next level. The next level is already embedded in that. Katariko, Muzihirwa, why would Muzihirwa be assassinated for calling out against the politicians and so forth? That is the next level. And then you begin to see within these stories that perhaps that is the church's gift in the world. That kind of being, in a way, groundwork, a ground for lament that is at the same time painful and discipline, but also an incredible gift, in a way. So I see a lot of next levels that are already happening in these stories that are actual. If you ask me, is there any hope in Africa? Sure. That I would like to tell Jason Stans that we need to look closer to see. There are a lot of civic-minded leaders in Africa. We need to learn to look in the right place. The challenge most of the time has been the social scientists look at the formal sector. They look at government. They look at politicians. And that's the only level of analysis. That's where, and I think this is a kind of assumption, that is where political change happens, according to this assumption. Wrong assumption, in my opinion. But that's kind of the mentality, this kind of formal level of politics, to think that that is where change, or democracy, or development happens. I think what we're trying to show is that actually, in order to discover what is going on, but also to discover the energy and the creativity, the innovativeness that is underway in Africa, you need to shift the lens and look also at the so-called informal sector. In my case, I want to even be more specific. You need to look in the faith sector, these faith-driven activists, and what they're trying to do. And you will discover that there is a lot that is interesting, actually, that is already at the next level, that is already engaged in politics, economics, with a new lens, but also providing incredible stories of transformation and innovativeness and hope.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And like I said to you before, that after reading Sacrifice of Africa and then listening to what you're doing in this book, that you're actually redefining the methodology in doing African theology. But I want to put on the cap of two of the most recent critics of some of the developments in African theology, Paul Clifford and Robert Calderisi. And in that light, to think that there is a certain enchantment within African Christianity. And this enchanted Christianity kind of prioritizes or even romanticizes the narrative of faith in Africa without addressing the fact that Africa's supposedly march towards modernity is being stalled by an enchantment of the narrative of Christian faith that refuses to look at the underlying socio-cultural, political, and even historical circumstances that have not been addressed, which is leading to these laments, as if to say then that there's some kind of inevitability to people killing each other, people dying this way. So, putting that cap, are you romanticizing the lament, or are you ignoring the fact that Congo, for instance, shouldn't have been Congo if there wasn't colonialism, slavery, and all the other issues that come up in discourses like this?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Stan. You and I need to talk about these things because they're so, I'm familiar with some of the critiques that, like for example, Paul Gifford in his recent book about the enchantment. And the one that I did in The Sacrifice of Africa, trying to narrate the story of politics and modernity in Africa, I was hoping that actually Paul Gifford would read that, but he does not. He does mention. I don't know whether he's a critic, but he does mention my work as one of the people that, for example, do not pay serious attention to the faith in Africa or something, or the way that faith operates, that I think I am reading Christianity in two spiritual terms or something like that. But anyway, I quite agree with your assessment of the situation, but that's what I find problematic. That's what I find problematic to think that the problem is with the Christianity that kind of has this kind of enchantment and does not critique modernity. That's the kind of work that I try to do in the Sacrifice of Africa, and showing that embedded within these stories like Taban, like Maggie, like Angelina, is actually a very profound and deep critique of politics in Africa. That is actually in the very process of being reinvented. That what they're doing would be completely misleading to call it spiritual. It would be completely misleading to call it humanitarian. What they're doing is deeply, deeply political. And what they refuse to do is to contribute to the political discussion as they are set. Are you for this or against this? Do you want a next election or not? Should it be within 2, 3, 4 years or 5 years? Should it be 1 term or 2 terms? Those are important in a way. But what they're pointing to is the deeper problem of the imagination that drives politics in Africa. That's where those critics go. So it's not just a question of that these religious leaders are not contributing to these kind of debates, and therefore they're kind of naively, in a way, operating within the landscape of Lament in Africa. I think they're providing a far deeper critique of politics in Africa. Do I, what was the question? Do I not pay attention to the colonialism, to the slavery? Am I romanticizing Lament? I wish I were romanticizing Lament. This is painful. This is very painful. And I have, some of these stories are extremely, extremely painful. But the stories that I'm trying to depict is, how do you work your way through Lament? How do these people, in a way, reason their way into the kind of agency that we see exhibited in their lives? In other words, in a situation of lament like Congo, Central African Republic, Northern Uganda, are there any resources in which Christian activists can tap to engage that historical context of oppression, of violence, of colonialism? So I'm moving in a way beyond the ordinary ways of approaching the question to kind of try to get to the underlying issues, but also to kind of provide what is the role of Christian faith within such a landscape. If it is enchantment, I guess it is, but I think it's a good kind of enchantment.
Well, very good presentation, and also very, very challenging. I happen to be a student of psychological trauma, and also continuing practitioner in terms of trying to assist people that are struggling to recover. This kind of work is very personal. I just want to get your feedback on one, how do you sustain your energy by, as you listen, see, think, and live this work? Because it's very, very traumatizing.
Yeah.
2, as you witness these folks who are really on the front line of recovery from trauma, trying to bring hope to so many lives, what sustains them? I know that faith is very important, and I'm not clear that's very, very important, but what else keeps them going when the kids go to sleep, when they're behind in their own bedrooms, when they are in their private moments? What is that? And then my third piece is, the change to happen eventually has to include people that have other power, especially political power. And so what is some of the vision on getting political leaders, not only in Africa, because the sufferings of Africa can be repeated in so many parts of the world. What is it going to take to have that level of engagement to carry on the work, sustain the hope?
Thank you. the personal question, as I work through these stories, which are quite painful, a number of them painful, what keeps me going? I've been lucky in a way. Some of the greatest gifts that I've received is to know actually people like these that are working on whose stories I'm actually trying to tell. They are those who are alive are some of the most fun-loving people. Whether it is a sister Rosemary Mirumbe or a Maggie or a Kasali, whenever I visit, whenever we have a lot of fun. It's actually incredible. The energy, the excitement, but also the kind of a sense that it is urgent work to be done. And for me, that is a gift, but also a challenge. It does keep me awake in a way. When you think about a Kasali in the middle of the war, setting up a university in Beni, when you think to 2014, a number of massacres around Beni, and he does say it's very challenging, a lot of massacres and so forth. And then I realized that I'm here at DePaul. I have an office. I'm staying at St. Clement. I have food. There are no bullets. I realized, well, if at least I can tell their stories, I hope in some way, some measure, I can contribute a little bit to the work that they are doing as they stand in the crossfires of this everyday challenges to their life. So I'm just kind of trying to say, why am I here? What's my role in a way to this movement of hope? And I discovered that given the gifts that I've been given where I am, this at least is something that I can do, and I'm happy to do that. So that's to the people. What keeps them going? What keeps the people going? That's actually one of the things that really has been driving this work, to kind of figure out for them, inside there, what keeps them going. And so what I try to do in these chapters, I try to give detailed or thick descriptions of their life and how they one thing led to another. And ask that question, what keeps them going? What I've discovered, that a number of them are kind of almost making the same reference, the same point. An excess of love is the only way to respond to an excess of evil. And they do encounter that excess of love in the story of the cross. And they do feel called into that story as God's children. But all of them say, it's such a wonderful story. They say, really? It seems to be... So what is wonderful? So I'm interested, what is wonderful? How do you discover? And all of them almost end their story saying that, who am I? Maggie ends by saying, what human beings? A leader asked her, how do you want to be remembered? She said, for me? I didn't think that everybody should be remembered. She said, we just grass. Grass that springs up in the morning and in the evening to be thus unfed. A reference to Psalm 90. So there is a certain kind of lightness about them in a way. I'm coming in from another side. I'm shocked. I'm surprised. I want to find out. You are in Congo, you are in Burundi, you are in northern Uganda, and you still laugh and smile. What keeps you going? So that's actually the story. But those kind of connections through an excess of love that they themselves feel in a way connected to that drama of love, and that it is a joyful call. It's amazing. It's surprising. But I also feel that that story is not told. It's not told because we usually tell those kind of stories as kind of humanitarian, which is okay, which is good, but it doesn't get to the inside. Or we just bracket those kind of stories and say, oh, the faith people, yeah, they believe in God, they find strength in God. Then you're not sure what kind of strength. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do from within each of these stories. And so what keeps them going is narrated by each of these people differently. But as I said, I see it kind of converging to that same story of the God of Lament, the God who responds to evil through an excess of love that is manifested in a special way on the cross. And it's humbling to say that. I didn't know that this is where this work actually was headed. I didn't know that this is where it was going to end. But I'm discovering more and more the theological logic, if you like, that Peter is talking about here, that it's actually connected with that logic of the cross. And so I begin to realize more and more that for Christians, as Paul says, without the cross, there is no hope. Yes, and that's a powerful claim. And I don't think we will be able to know that unless we have people like some of these, and we know these stories, the inside stories of what is driving them. And finally, other forms of power, politics, how they engage that, and so forth. I think, as I said to Mark, they're already doing that. They invite leaders, they advocate. We just had a meeting with some of the key religious and civic leaders last year, part of the Great Lakes Initiative, where they kind of try to do, in a way, the kind of that influence on so many levels. The building up of a university, the setting up of a radio station, different meetings. So I think that's kind of varied ways of engaging these other political powers that you're right, they need to be engaged in the work of reinventing a new future for Africa. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.